got the most argument because I retweeted you and I said, okay, we know it's Ole Miss and this school. And I had a lot of people arguing with me. No, they're not now or never because of their historical success. So Ohio State. So, right, it's not now or never for Ohio State in terms of national title contention. Because, like, if they don't win the national title this year, an Ohio State team at some point in the next 2 or 3 years is going to be competing for the national title because that's what Ohio State does. Mm-hmm. But you are rarely going to see a team as set up to win a national title from roster to coaching staff to everything more than this Ohio State team. So what I ask you, JD, and this is what some of the folks were trying to parse here, and I think that's a good point. Is it now or never for Ohio State or now or never for Ryan Day?
It feels a lot like the latter, doesn't it? And I personally have been extremely pro Ryan Day, probably even to a fault. Like my thing is he's won north of 87% of his games. However, a lot of those losses have come from the team you just can't lose. You just can't lose to Michigan. And he's lost to Michigan now 3 times in a row. And if it's a 4th time in a row, I think there's going to be some very real unrest. And I think Ryan Day deserves a lot of credit for the record. Like, he'd never been a head coach before getting the head coaching job at the Ohio State, which is like going from playing dive bars one day to playing the Grand Ole Opry the next day. So there's, probably a learning curve baked in here. And also I think it's worth noting Ohio State, from the team that he took over to where they are now, stylistically, they've been able to really adapt a lot. Like, previously they were this team that would go score 40 a game, and you got to give them a lot of credit for having that kind of an offense. But I mean, last year, Andy, we saw it, and you saw it in person against Notre Dame. Like, they were a defensive-led football team, as weird as that is to say. So I think he has adapted a lot, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. But at the end of the day, especially in Columbus, like, it's a bottom line business. You got to beat Michigan, and you got to go win national championships. Now, he was however many feet away that kick was from the left upright from going and winning a national championship against Georgia when they had that college football playoff game in Atlanta back in 2022, I suppose it was, 2023. So all that's to say, it feels now or never for Ryan Day, as much as I disagree with that. But, he knows what he signed up for, being the head coach there. And it's got to be this year with all they have on defense and all they have on that roster period.
I feel like the adaptation has just been going back to what he inherited. Like, in 2019, sure, the team he inherited was stacked. It was an incredible defensive team. And, they lose to Clemson in that Fiesta Bowl. Clemson still had Trevor Lawrence, still had Travis Etienne, still had T. Higgins. And it was a very close game. There was a controversial targeting call that if you're asking an Ohio State fan, they'll tell you that changed the game completely. But they went away from that for a while. Like, the offense stayed very potent, but the defense was not as good. They hired Jim Knowles. It took a year. That first year, they were giving up too many big plays still. But last year, I'd say they got where they needed to be defensively. So now they need to get where they need to be offensively. Chip Kelly is very, like, bringing in Chip Kelly is I think that's the most fascinating hire of the offseason. And I realized that wasn't the original plan. The original plan was Bill O'Brien. Then he gets hired for the head coaching job at Boston College. But JD, I think, like, Chip Kelly is the perfect person to hire if you're Ryan Day and you're trying to decide, okay, how do I handle giving up play calling to handle the more global aspects of this job? Because who do I trust to call plays for me? Well, who more do you trust than the guy who taught you how to call plays?
Yes. Yeah, it's like passing off the controller to your dad. Like, he taught you everything, he was the one who oversaw your success. Now you say, okay, I got to go do something else, but who do I trust? Like you just mentioned, essentially his football dad in Chip Kelly. I also think it's worth noting from a roster level, the big question that a lot of folks have with Ohio State offensively is like, hey, what's the offensive line going to be? We got great skill players. I think Will Howard is kind of polarizing when that's a whole other discussion in itself, but people question the offensive line. Like, I remember watching Oregon just run circles around everybody with 3-star offensive linemen and below when he was at Oregon. So that's not to speak ill of Ohio State's offensive line, but my point is Chip Kelly has done more with less. I think the way that he runs this offense will be able to kind of compensate for maybe what they don't have on that offensive line in Columbus.
Yeah, and I think I think they overachieved with what they had at UCLA offensively in terms of the talent they had. Mm-hmm. And now he has a lot more talent. He doesn't have to be in charge of recruiting it. Ryan Day's in charge of recruiting it. So you hand Chip Kelly this uber talented roster and say, okay, now overachieve with this and see what that looks like. Because, you know, I look at Will Howard and you say, okay, let's compare Will Howard to Dorian Thompson-Robinson.
Yeah.
Well, Dorian Thompson-Robinson was a pretty athletic quarterback with a very strong arm. Will Howard is a bigger version of that and probably maybe even a little bit better athlete. So you've got that. You have Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson in your backfield. We'll see what Jeremiah Smith can do, but it certainly sounds like he's as advertised. But they also have Emeka Egbuka, the Carnell Tate. Like, they are loaded at receiver. So they have everything. And again, I'll do what we did with Ole Miss. Like, but what happens if they lose to Michigan? What if they lose to Michigan again? What if Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham just come crashing through that offensive line that we've been talking about and just stuff Will Howard at the goal line on a key play and Michigan wins that game again?
Can you imagine? In Columbus, no less. Like, to have that be the gut punch, but have it be at your crib. Yeah, I think the honest answer is, like, Ryan Day's job is probably up in the air. And I don't think that's fair. That's not how I would run it.
Like, they're not going to fire him, JD, but it's like,
I don't know.
If you lose, okay, I'm with you. I'm with you, but I'm telling you right now, they're not going to fire him. If that were to change, if something were to happen, it would be a Ryan Day goes and finds another job situation.
Okay, interesting.
Ohio State's not going to fire that guy. Like, Ross Bjork just took over from Gene Smith, but he's not stupid. Like, Ross Bjork's been at Texas A&M dying for this level of success for a long time. He was at Ole Miss before that, dying for that level of success for a long time. So he understands how hard it is to get to this point. I don't think they're going to fire anybody, but if you're Ryan Day, if you lost to Michigan again and didn't, like, okay, you can lose to Michigan and then win the national title. Like, right. 2022, they almost actually did that. But let's say you lose to Michigan again and then you get knocked out in the first round of the quarterfinals of the playoff. I would think the pressure or the noise will be so loud that you would just go, like, if you're Ryan Day, you're like, forget it.
Yeah.
I'm not dealing with this anymore.
Which, honestly, like, as I've said, being a pro Ryan Day guy, I'm like, honestly, more power to him if that's the direction you go. Like, I think you should go where you're wanted. And if you lose for the fourth time in a row against Michigan and all that volume turns up yet again and people are talking about what you haven't done as a head coach, like, I would honestly say, great, like, more power to Ryan Day. I think the other thing that's interesting here, which you just alluded to, we're going to see teams now have mulligans. So, like, we could see Ohio State be 11-1 and be a 6 seed or a 5 seed in the college football playoff. We saw that Ohio State team in 2022 go out against Georgia and just look revitalized. So it seems like Ryan Day is able to kind of get his guys going, especially after a loss. I would be very curious to see them walk into the playoff at 11-1 with something to prove, chip on their shoulder. They've heard all the noise and go on a run and win a national championship. I wonder if they're almost more dangerous. It sounds bizarre to say, but I think there's something to it, more dangerous if they lose to Michigan yet again, the volume turns up, and then they get into 12-team playoff where it's like, all right, like Greg Heffley says, I need you now tonight. I need you more than ever.
We're back. We're back to Total Eclipse of the Heart. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.